All right, babies, we're gonna continue where we left off. Little House in the Big Woods. Let me get my glasses real quick. Once again, I forget my glasses, but I don't want to stop the video. So here we are. Okay, let's see where, oh, here we are. Okay. Then all the presents must be laid away for a little while. Peter went out with Pa and Uncle Peter to do the chores, and Alice and Ella helped Aunt Eliza make the beds, and Laura and Mary set the table while Ma got breakfast. For breakfast, there were pancakes, and Ma made a pancake man for each one of the children. Ma called each one of them in turn to bring her plate, and each could stand by the stove and watch, while with the spoon full of batter, Ma put on arms and legs and the head. It was exciting to watch her turn the whole little man over quickly and carefully on a hot griddle. When it was done, she put it smoking hot on the plate. Peter ate the head off his man right away. But Alice and Ella and Mary and Laura ate theirs slowly in little bits. First the arms and the legs, and then the middle, saving the head for last. Today, the weather was so cold that they could not play outdoors, but there were new mittens to admire and the candy to lick. And they all sat on the floor together and looked at the pictures in the Bible and the pictures of all the animals and all kinds of birds in Pa's big green book. Laura kept Charlotte in her arms the whole time. Then there was the Christmas dinner. Alice and Ella and Peter and Mary and Laura did not say a word at the table, for they knew that children must be seen and not heard. But they did not need to ask for second helpings. Ma and Aunt Eliza kept their plates full and let them eat all the good things they could hold. Christmas comes but once a year, said Aunt Eliza. Dinner was early because Aunt Eliza, Uncle Peter, and the cousins had such a long way to go. Now they're getting ready, I think, to go. Best the horses can do, Uncle Peter said. We'll hardly make it home before dark. Soon as they had eaten dinner, Uncle Peter and Pa went to put the horses to the sled, while Ma and Aunt Eliza wrapped up the cousins. They pulled heavy woolen stockings over the woolen stockings. And the shoes they were already wearing. They put on mittens and coats and warm hoods and shawls and wrapped mufflers around their necks and thick woolen veils over their faces. Ma slipped piping hot baked potatoes into their pockets to keep their fingers warm, and Aunt Eliza's flat irons were hot on the stove, ready to put at their feet in the sled. The blankets and the quilts and the buffalo robes were warmed too. So they all got into the big bobsled, cozy and warm, and Pa tucked the last robe well in around them. Goodbye, goodbye, they called, and off they went. The horses trotting gaily and the sleigh bells ringing. In just a little while, the merry sound of the bells were gone, and Christmas was over. But what a happy Christmas it had been. The next chapter is called Sundays. And it looks like Laura is sitting there with her doll Charlotte next to her. Now the winter seemed long. Laura and Mary began to be tired, staying always in the house, especially on Sundays. The time went so slowly. Every Sunday, Mary and Laura were dressed from the skin out in their best clothes with fresh ribbons in their hair. They were very clean because they had their baths on Saturday night. In the summer, they were bathed in from the spring, but in the wintertime, Pa filled and heaped the wash tub with clean snow, and on the stove, it melted to water. Then, close by the warm stove, behind a screen made of a blanket over two chairs, Ma bathed Laura and then she bathed Mary. Laura was bathed first because she was littler than Mary. She had to go to bed earlier on Saturday nights with Charlotte because after she was bathed and put into her clean nightgown, Pa must empty the wash tub and fill it again with snow for Mary's bath. Then after Mary came to bed, Ma had her bath behind the blanket, and then Pa had his, and they were all clean for Sunday. On Sundays, Mary and Laura must not run or shout or be noisy in their play. Mary could not sew on her 9-patch quilt, and Laura could not knit on the tiny mittens she was making for baby Carrie. They might look quietly at their paper dolls, but they must not make anything new for them. They were not allowed to sew on doll clothes, not even with pins. They must sit quietly and listen while Ma read Bible stories to them, or stories about lions and tigers and white bears from Pa's big green book called The Wonders of the Animal World. They might look at pictures, and they might hold their rag dolls nicely and talk to them, but there was nothing else they could do. Laura liked best to look at the pictures in the big Bible with its paper covers. Best of all was the picture of Adam naming the animals. Adam sat on a rock, and all the animals and birds, big and little, were gathered around him, anxiously waiting to be told what kind of animals they were. Adam looked so comfortable. He did not have to be careful to keep his clothes clean because he had no clothes on. He wore only a skin around his middle. Did Adam have good clothes to wear on Sundays? Laura asked Ma. No, said Ma. Poor Adam, all he had to wear was skins. Laura did not pity Adam. She wished she had nothing to wear but skins. On Sunday after supper, she could not bear it any longer. She began to play with Jack, and in a few minutes she was running and shouting. Pa told her to sit in her chair and be quiet, but when Laura sat down, she began to cry and kick the chair with her heels. I hate Sundays, she said. Pa put the book down and said, Laura, come here. Her feet dragged as she went because she knew she deserved a spanking. But when she reached Pa, he looked at her sorrowfully for a moment and then took her on his knee and cuddled her against him. He held out his other arm to Mary and said, I'm going to tell you a story about when Grandpa was a boy. The story of Grandpa's sled and the pig. There's Laura, so unhappy about Sunday, and there's the pig. When your grandpa was a boy, Laura, Sunday did not begin on Sunday morning as it does now. It began on sundown on Saturday night. Then everyone stopped every kind of work or play. Supper was solemn. After supper, Grandpa's father read aloud a chapter of the Bible while everyone sat straight and still in his chair. Then they all knelt down, and their father said a long prayer. When he said amen, they got up from their knees and each took a candle and went to bed. They must go straight to bed with no playing, laughing, or even talking. Sunday morning, they ate a cold breakfast because nothing could be cooked on Sunday. Then they all dressed with their best clothes and walked to church. They walked because hitching up the horses was work, and no work could be done on Sunday. They must walk slowly and solemnly, looking straight ahead. They must not joke or laugh or even smile. Grandpa and his 2 brothers walked ahead, and their father and mother walked behind them. In church, Grandpa and his brothers must sit perfectly still for 2 long hours and listen to the sermon. They dared not fidget on the hard bench. They dared not swing their feet. They dared not turn their heads to look at the windows or the walls or the ceiling of the church. They must sit perfectly motionless and never for one instant take their eyes from the preacher. When church was over, they walked slowly home. They might talk on the way, but they must not talk loudly, and they must never laugh or smile. At home, they ate a cold dinner, which had been cooked the day before. Then all the long afternoon, they must sit in a row on a bench and study their catechism until at last the sun went down and Sunday was over. Now, Grandpa's home was about halfway down the side of a steep hill. The road went from the top of the hill to the bottom, right past the front door, and in the winter, it was the best place for sliding downhill. that you can possibly imagine. One week, Grandpa and his two brothers, James and George, were making a new sled. They worked at it every minute of their playtime. It was the best sled they had ever made, and it was so long that all three of them could sit on it, one behind the other. They planned to finish it in time to slide downhill Saturday afternoon. For every Saturday afternoon, they had 2 or 3 hours they could play. But that week, their father was cutting down trees in the big woods. He was working hard, and he kept the boys working with him. They did all the morning chores by lantern light and were hard at work in the woods when the sun came up. They worked till dark, and then there were chores to do, and after supper they had to go to bed so they could get up in the morning, early in the morning. They had no time to work on the sled until Saturday afternoon. Then they worked at it as fast as they could, but they didn't get it finished till just as the sun went down, Saturday night. After the sun went down, they could not slide down the hill, not even once. That would be breaking the Sabbath. So they put the sled in the shed behind the house to wait until Sunday was over. All the 2 long hours in church next day, while they kept their feet still and their eyes on the preacher, they were thinking about the sled. At home, while they ate dinner, they couldn't think of anything else. After dinner, their father sat down to read the Bible, and Grandpa and James and George sat as still as mice on their bench with their catechism. But they were thinking about the sled. The sun shone brightly and the snow was smooth and glittering on the road. They could see through the window. It was a perfect day for sliding downhill. They looked at their catechism and they thought about the new sled, and it seemed that Sunday would never end. After a long time, they heard a snore. They looked at their father, and they saw his head had fallen against the back of the chair and he was fast asleep. Then James looked at George, and James got up from the bench and tiptoed out of the room through the back door. George looked at Grandpa, and George tiptoed after James, and Grandpa looked fearfully at their father. But on tiptoe, he followed George and left their father snoring. They took their new sled and went quietly up to the top of the hill. They meant to slide down just once. Then they would put the sled away and slip back onto their bench in the catechism before their father woke up. James sat in front on the sled, and then George, and then Grandpa, because he was the littlest. The sled started at first slowly, then faster and faster. It was running, flying down the long, steep hill, but the boys dared not shout. They must slide silently past the house without waking their father. There was no sound except the little whir of the runners on the snow and the wind rushing past. Then just as the sled was swooping toward the house, a big black pig stepped out of the woods. He walked into the middle of the road and stood there. The sled was going so fast it couldn't be stopped. There wasn't time to turn. The sled went right under the hog and picked him up. With a squeal, he sat down on James. And he kept on squealing long and loud and shrill. Squee! Squee! They flashed by the house, the pig sitting in front, then James, then George, then Grandpa, and they saw their father standing in the doorway, looking at them. They couldn't stop. They couldn't hide. There was no time to say anything. Down the hill they went, the hog sitting on James and squealing all the way. At the bottom of the hill, they stopped. The hog jumped off James and ran away into the woods, still squealing. The boys walked slowly and solemnly up the hill. They put the sled away. They sneaked into the house and slipped quietly into their places on the bench. Their father was reading his Bible. He looked up at them without saying a word. Then he went on reading, and they studied their catechism. But when the sun went down and the Sabbath was over, their father took them out to the woodshed and panned their jackets. First James, then George, and Grandpa. So you see, Laura and Mary, Pa said, you may find it hard to be good, but you should be glad that it wasn't as hard to be good now as it was when Grandpa was a boy. Did little girls have to be as good as that? Laura asked, and Ma said, it was harder for little girls because they had to behave like little ladies all the time, not only on Sundays. Little girls could never slide downhill like boys. Little girls had to sit in the house and stitch on samplers. Now run along and let Ma put you to bed, said Pa. And he took his fiddle out of its box. And I'm gonna stop there. But here's a picture of the pig sitting on James's lap as we're going down the hill. And I gotta stop now. I love you guys, bye.